Star Trek, The Next Generation, Starfleet Academy, Nova Command, Chapter 5. The Nova Command teams were slated for departure very early the next morning. So early, in fact, that Jean-Luc reported before the sun was up. He carried a single suitcase and his data pad, the only luggage he would be allowed to take with him on the long trip. The departure order glowing on his pad told him he was to board Shuttle 6, one of the second flight groups to lift off. Marta, looking just as excited as he felt, was to board that shuttle too, so they stood together, skin tingling a little in the pre-dawn chill. Jean-Luc's heart was fluttering. He had flown before, a good number of times, in fact. When he was in high school, he had taken a number of trips to North America, Australia, and all over Europe on various schools excursions and competitions. And, of course, he had taken the transatlantic shuttle from France to San Francisco to begin his career at Starfleet Academy. Still, all of those flights had been suborbital trips. He had only approached the fringes of space. This time he would really be out there in the dark interplanetary reaches between Earth and Mars. Just knowing that this trip would be the real thing, not a holographic simulation, made him shiver with anticipation. 5 shuttle pads were operating. With a hum of engines and a whine of power, the first flight of 5 took off, and 5 more Starfleet Type 12 personnel shuttles settled onto the pads. The boarding light changed from red to green. The automatic gate of Pad 1 opened. Jean-Luc hefted his bag, and he and Marta hurried aboard. 2 Starfleet lieutenants watched as the cadets filed in, went down the center aisle, and found seats. When everyone was aboard, one of them said, "You boarded interplanetary shuttlecraft at Olympus. In just a moment, we'll lift off. We expect to leave the Earth's atmosphere in 20 minutes. While in low orbit, we will proceed with thrusters to departure point Gamma. Then we will engage warp drive for the trip to Mars. Our warp transit time should be 4 hours and 20 minutes, and we anticipate docking at 1300 hours standard time." Any questions? "No, Lieutenant. We just want to get off the ground," yelled someone from up ahead. Jean-Luc winced. It was Roger Wells' voice. Just his luck to be stuck on a shuttle with that particular cadet. At least Roger was 5 rows ahead in the very front of the cabin. And at least Marta was here beside him, in the back row, and a row ahead of him sat Tom Franklin. With luck, Roger might not even notice Jean-Luc. Maybe the flight wouldn't be all that bad. Jean-Luc had chosen a window seat. He stared out as the shuttle lifted off and began the long arc of its climb to space. Acceleration pressed him back in the seat until the ship's artificial gravity cut in, a minute or so after takeoff. They headed east, and the sunrise caught them before long. Jean-Luc could see orange-yellow deserts, snaky green riverbeds, huge masses and splotches of low clouds far below the shuttle. The sky grew a darker and darker blue until it was violet. The misty blue horizon began to show a definite curve. Stars appeared, and before Jean-Luc knew it, the shuttle was in low Earth orbit. The black vacuum of space, strewn with stars, was overhead and all around the shuttle. He stared down as the eastern seaboard of North America slipped away, looking like a continent sketched on a globe. "Look, Jean-Luc. No, not down, look up." Marta pointed out a starship, an enormous Excelsior-class vessel in a slightly higher orbit. "Going to McKinley," she said. Jean-Luc nodded. McKinley Station was where Starfleet ships went for refitting and repair. He wondered if they would get a glimpse of it. As it turned out, they would not. "Cadets," one of the pilots said over the intercom, "we're about to engage a warp drive. If this is new to you, you'd better hold on tight. Here we go." Involuntarily, Jean-Luc gripped the armrests of his seat. Marta laughed, and all around him experienced space travelers were giggling at the reactions of their less knowledgeable friends. The Cochrane engines throbbed a little louder. The Starfleet field outside blurred, and that was all. With the inertia damping field of a shuttlecraft providing gravity for him, Jean-Luc didn't even have a sensation of acceleration. He relaxed. "I should have known better than that. They caught me off guard." "It's an old tradition," Marta said. Tom Franklin turned around and rested his hand on the back of his seat. "So far, so good," he said with a smile. "Enjoying the trip, Jean-Luc?" "Immensely," Marta said. "I'll enjoy it more when I find out about our assignments. I don't want to wind up being the communications officer." "What's wrong with communications officer?" "Oh, you won't," Franklin said. "You're to be the chief engineer and helmsman on the Ishtar. I'm handling communications and computer operations." Jean-Luc gave him a suspicious stare. "I didn't think assignments would be announced until we arrived." Franklin grinned and shrugged. "I told you I'm interested in artificial intelligence and computer systems. It so happens that I helped design the program that made the team assignments. I thought you two might like to be on the same ship, and since you're good company, I decided to tag along as well. We'll be shipmates aboard the good trainer Ishtar." "Oh," Jean-Luc hesitated, but he couldn't hold the question in. "And what will my assignment be?" "You're holding the navigation and science seat." Jean-Luc tried to keep a smile on his face, but he didn't quite succeed. Marta noticed his disappointment and asked, "What's wrong? That's a great assignment." "Oh, it is," said Jean-Luc. "It's just that, well, I know that a Nova trainer must be commanded by a fourth-year cadet, so I had no illusions about being captain. But I hoped maybe I might be the executive officer." Franklin shook his head. "Sorry, Jean-Luc. You were in the running, but Roger Wells edged you out." "What?" Franklin blinked at the irritation in Jean-Luc's voice. "Uh-oh, did I make a mistake?" Marta said, "No, not really. It's just that we're surprised to be on the same ship with him." "And not delighted," added Jean-Luc. "Sorry," Franklin told them. "I thought you all knew each other. If I'd known—" "Forget it," Jean-Luc said. "It's all water under the bridge now. Roger's the exec. But tell me, who's the captain to be?" Franklin straightened and looked up ahead. "Tabith Rand. I can see the back of her head from here. She's sitting next to Roger. Do you know her?" Both Jean-Luc and Marta shook their heads. "I'm not surprised," Franklin said. "She's a Comoran, and you've probably noticed how they keep to themselves." Jean-Luc had glimpsed 2 or 3 Comoran cadets. The alien students tended to go about in couples or small groups. They were stumpy humanoids, all of them more than a head shorter than Jean-Luc. Comora, their homeworld, was a heavy gravity, very salty, shallow planetary ocean, and a single continent, hot and dry. Comorans were a semi-amphibian species, comfortable on dry land, but able to stay submerged for long periods. They were somewhat lizard-like in appearance, their skin covered with iridescent hexagonal scales. These shone in all the colors of the rainbow, depending on the light. Their eyes were slitted and red, and they had no real noses, just a flat pad with 4 thin nostrils. Their mouths, by contrast, were well developed. In fact, their lips stretched from ear to ear, or would have if Comorans had external ears. Boys and girls dressed alike, even when they weren't wearing Starfleet Academy uniforms. Their normal clothing consisted of odd-shaped boots which gave them the appearance of having feet like ducks, and one-piece silvery jumpsuits. In addition, both sexes were bald, and Jean-Luc couldn't tell the females from the males. Of course, he had barely spoken to any of the clannish Comorans. "They're rare in Starfleet," he said. Franklin nodded. "Only about 100 Comorans in the service right now. Only 6 of them at the academy. Tabith Rand is one of the most gifted upper-class cadets, or so I hear. She tends to be a little gruff and a little grumpy, but don't sell her short. She's a first-rate pilot, and she'll insist on running a tight ship." Jean-Luc had never seen anything as beautiful as Bradbury Orbital Base. The shuttle had dropped out of warp speed a few 100,000 kilometers short of Mars, and they approached the planet using only thrusters. They were coming straight in from the sun, so Mars swelled into a huge tawny red sphere, pockmarked with ancient craters studded with enormous volcanoes, and now that the process of terraforming was well underway, blurred with the blue haze of a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere and striped by long white swatches of cloud. Bringing water and oxygen from outer bodies to the solar system for generations, humans had been busily changing the face of the dead planet. Beneath his tunic, on a chain around his neck, Jean-Luc wore an ancient St. Christopher medallion. It was a family heirloom, supposedly brought back from Jerusalem during a crusade in the Middle Ages by a remote ancestor, at once representing the savagery of organized religion and the way in which it doesn't mind killing people. And what am I going on about? But somewhat closer in time, one Auguste Picard, Jean-Luc's great-great-grandfather, had worn it to Mars and back. Jean-Luc had heard a little family talk about his illustrious ancestor, but not much, because Maurice Picard seemed to regard even that remote space traveler somehow a traitor to the cause of vineyards and grapes. At the academy, Jean-Luc had run across the name in history texts, and it intrigued him to learn that Auguste Picard was an early settler on Mars, living under a dome on the surface, long before the terraforming process that had made Mars habitable. And that was still going on at this very moment. Jean-Luc shivered a little. He was taking his great-grandfather's medallion on a homecoming trip of a sort. He knew that Auguste Picard had died long before efforts had made it possible for anyone to venture outside a pressurized Martian dome. What would he think of his planet if he could see it now, as his great-great-grandson did? Jean-Luc resolved to find the time to go down to the Martian surface at least once, to go for a low-gravity walk out in the open, under the Martian sky. It would be a kind of tribute to that older Picard, his fellow space traveler. But right now, Jean-Luc couldn't get enough of the sight of the planet as it grew larger with their approach. Where would he take his walk? Probably down in the great Mariner Rift Valley. At the lower elevations, the atmosphere was already thick enough for humans to breathe without masks. And in the huge Rift Valley, named for an unmanned space probe that had landed on Mars centuries ago, a real sea was already rippling in the sun. Auguste Picard's dream was coming true. One day Mars would be a smaller brother to Earth, and that day was fast approaching. Jean-Luc gasped. His view of the planet was splendid, breathtaking, but what had really taken his breath was the moment that Bradbury Station swept into view, sailing serenely from behind the curved, atmosphere-blurred horizon of Mars. The orbital station was a shining white, a complex of 6 enormous work and habitation discs, each level capable of supporting more than 10,000 colonists and workers. It was far larger than either of the 2 puny moons of Mars, and as the shuttle approached, it grew until it more than filled the viewports. Still, they were a long way away, and Jean-Luc could see the tiny specks of 2- and 3-person shuttles and the barely visible darting forms of 1-person work bees, the tiny ships that carried out the ordinary tasks of maintaining and enlarging one of the solar system's largest space constructs. "Close your mouth, farm boy," came a sneering voice behind him. "Your tongue will dehydrate." Jean-Luc glanced around in annoyance, his mood ruined. Roger stood there, leaning on Marta's seat back. Roger was not a welcome visitor. "Sorry if my enthusiasm offends you, but it's the first time I've seen a working space station," Jean-Luc said. Roger patted Marta on the shoulder. "Our wine-growing friend is a little naive, isn't he?" Marta didn't look up at him. "I was dazzled when I first went into space too, Roger." Roger grinned. "Oh, so was I think. Of course, I can't really remember. I was probably about 2 years old at the time. After we dock, why don't we get a bite to eat together? I'll tell you about it." Marta gave him an irritated glare. "Thank you, Roger, but Jean-Luc and I already have plans." She turned to Jean-Luc, giving him a wink. "Isn't that right?" "Absolutely," Jean-Luc said. He fought hard to keep his poker face on, though the way Marta had just put Roger in his place delighted him. Roger sniffed and straightened up. "All right," he said. Then in a louder voice he added, "I guess second-raters just like to hang out together, that's all." Jean-Luc's cheeks grew hot. He could stand being teased about almost anything else, but not about that. "Go away," he growled. Marta put her hand on his arm and gave him a little warning squeeze. Be careful," it told Jean-Luc silently. "Oh, I'm going," Roger said. "We have to strap in for docking, you know. But let me tell you something, Mr. Picard. As executive officer on the Ishtar, I'm going to be in charge of reporting on crew morale and achievement. You'd better shape up if you want to get a good rating." Suddenly he grinned and gave Marta an extravagant wink, as though his threat were just a joke. He went forward. As he passed Tom Franklin, Franklin turned in his seat. He had a worried expression on his face. He silently mouthed the word "sorry" to Jean-Luc. Marta patted his arm. "Don't let him get to you. Roger's so full of himself he doesn't have any room left over for manners." "I know," Jean-Luc returned. "It isn't just that he's good. I could accept that. It's that he's so blasted smug about it." Just then the pilot asked everyone to prepare for docking. Jean-Luc turned and stared out the window again. By now the only thing he could see was a gigantic landing bay with several shuttles already down. He stared as they slipped through the force field protected space lock, felt a little sickening lurch as the shuttle gravity gave way to the station gravity, and heard the metallic clang as the shuttle set down. He drew a deep breath. What he had said to Marta was true as far as it went, but what really bothered him down deep was the suspicion that in his younger days, in high school, he had been a lot like Roger, always the best at everything, and not afraid to let people know about his accomplishments, never a moment of doubt, till his first humiliating failure when he applied to Starfleet Academy. Had he possibly been as irritating as Roger could be? Jean-Luc hoped not, but he half suspected that many of his acquaintances had felt the same dull resentment for him that he now felt for Roger. Oh well, Jean-Luc was over his cockiness now, at least on the inside. He still kept up appearances of assurance, and he still tried to be a very cool and collected customer, But the truth was that he no longer felt the calm attitude he projected. Now he was just pretending to have a great deal more confidence than he actually had. Jean-Luc thought grimly that the Nova Command would be a chance for him to show what he could do. He ground his teeth together. He'd show Roger. He'd show all of them. The hatchway opened at the rear, and he and Marta rose together. They stepped out of the shuttle and into the first real challenge of their lives at Starfleet Academy. Chapter 6. "Congratulations, Cadet Picard," said Captain Page dryly. "You've just scrambled Mr. Franklin's molecules. Let's see if he comes out as a purple giraffe." Jean-Luc Picard ground his teeth. It was hardly fair. This was his first time trying to operate a transporter, after all. But then no one had promised him that the Academy would be easy. He looked at the monitor. Tom Franklin grinned at him and waved. It was an eerie sort of wave, since Tom was missing everything from his armpits down. His head and shoulders simply floated in air, looking ghostly and weird. "You're lucky it's just a holographic simulation," Captain Page told Jean-Luc. "Otherwise you'd be hours cleaning up the transporter pad." He readjusted the transporter controls, and the image of Franklin became whole again. "Now, what's the first thing to do after you've locked onto a target?" "Activate the pattern buffer," Jean-Luc said. "Exactly right. Next time, do that before you engage a transporter beam, and then perhaps you won't cut your target into tiny little pieces." Jean-Luc concentrated. It was one thing to know all about transporter theory and technology, but it was another to actually be at the controls. Simple and automated as they were, they still gave a hapless cadet a vast range of mistakes to make, as he had just proved in a spectacular fashion. When Jean-Luc had run the transporter program correctly several times, gaining speed with each repetition, Captain Page grunted his satisfaction. All right, let's try the real thing." He told the computer to switch off the simulation override. "I'm not sure I'd trust you quite yet to transport me anywhere, Mr. Picard, so instead let me send you out to the Ishtar and back. Ever transported before?" "Yes," Jean-Luc said. "Into space?" "No," he had to admit, "but I've used a short-range network on Earth several times." "Well, this is the same principle," Page said. "However, in going from ship to ship, you may not have all the little conveniences of groundside transportation. Ever noticed how the ground stations give you a long exit corridor? That's to help adjust atmospheric pressure, temperature, and other variables. Starships are fairly standard, so you won't have that long corridor, but they're only fairly standard. So although we'll do some adjusting for small differences in atmosphere and pressure, you may find the sensations just a bit different. Get ready." Jean-Luc stood on the round transporter pad. Seconds passed. "Well?" Captain Page asked with exaggerated courtesy. Jean-Luc swallowed. He had forgotten that the person being transported from a ship always gave the command, regardless of his or her rank. "Energize." A whine of energy, high-pitched and rising in volume. His skin tingled. The scene before him, the small transporter bay with its 3 pads, sparkled and faded, and for a moment there was cool, empty blackness. Then sparkling lights again, and he materialized. His ears popped. Not painfully, but enough for him to notice. He drew a deep breath and smelled the sharp scent of metal. The air cooler in his nostrils than he expected. The Ishtar was a small ship. The transporter bay much more cramped and crowded than the one he had just left on the station. His communicator badge chirped, and he touched it. "Picard here." "How was the trip?" asked Page's voice. "Very comfortable, thank you, sir." "Of course. As long as you're there, you might as well go forward and inspect your science station. I'll give you 10 minutes and report back to the transporter bay for return here." Thank you, sir. Jean-Luc walked through a narrow corridor. He had studied sketches and hollows of the ship, and he already knew his way around. A hatch led down to the 5 cramped bunks, tiny bathroom, and small replicator galley of the crew quarters. Ahead of him was the bridge. The Ishtar was docked, receiving its energy from the station instead of from its own power plants, but everything was working. The automatic doors hissed open as they sensed Jean-Luc's approach. He walked onto the bridge. The forward view screen was blank at the moment. Jean-Luc looked around at the 5 seats. The Ishtar wasn't much as spaceships went. It couldn't attain warp speeds. It was unarmed, and its working space was constricted. But as he slid into his station beneath a projecting console, Jean-Luc felt nothing but elation. The Ishtar was, for the moment anyway, his ship. He ran through a quick check of sensors and monitors and found everything ready. Then he got out of his seat, stooping to avoid bumping his head on the projecting bank of overhead consoles. After a moment of indecision, he went forward to the captain's seat and settled into that. "Computer," he said on impulse, "activate the view screen." The screen came to life. He saw the Ishtar was tethered to a docking ring. In fact, if he opened the hatch to the living quarters and then opened the one below that, he would be in an airlock leading into the Bradbury station. Transporting onto the ship, instead of walking aboard, was just an option at this point. To his left and right, other training ships were docked. He could see the Aphrodite to his right, and beyond that, the Quetzalcoatl and the Ra. Others lay too far away for him to see their names. One, far down the line, left its station, and with a touch of thrusters, moved off toward the darkness of space. Jean-Luc envied that crew, already out for a short shakedown cruise. He sighed, ordered the computer to turn off the screens, and hurried back to the transporter bay. He had just stepped onto the pad when Captain Page's voice came over the communicator. "Standing by." "Energize," Jean-Luc said smartly. Again, the shimmering moment of disorientation, and then he was back aboard the station, Captain Page smiling at him from behind the transporter controls. "Welcome back. I see you're in one piece." "Yes, sir. It was a good trip. Thank you." "You're welcome." Captain Page turned off the power of the transporter console. And then with a suspiciously bland smile, he asked, "By the way, Mr. Picard, how was the captain's seat?" Jean-Luc blinked. How did you know?" Page laughed. "I wouldn't think much of you if you didn't try it out for size." He stepped away from the transporter console and gave it a quick visual check out. "Now come over here and see if you remember anything of what you've learned so far. You can start by turning on the power, if you can recall exactly which switch to use." Not every session was one-on-one. Bradbury Station did not provide huge lecture halls, but one meeting room could accommodate up to 75 cadets. Jean-Luc attended lectures and presentations there, usually with Marta or Tom Franklin, sometimes with other navigation and science specialist cadets. After one of these, as he and Tom were leaving the classroom, the sight of Marta walking beside Roger Wells surprised him. He hurried to catch up. "Hi," he said. I didn't see you come in." Marta returned his smile. "Roger and I got there a little late. We sat together in the back." "Oh." Roger took Marta's arm. "And we're going to do a little private studying now, Picard. I'm sure you've got some cramming to do to bring your science officer skills up to par." Jean-Luc glared at him. "Actually, I'm all caught up." Ignoring Roger, he turned back to Marta. "Free for dinner tonight?" "Well, I sort of promised. The two of us are dining together," Roger said. He tugged Marta's arm. "Come on. We don't want to be late." Jean-Luc must have looked stricken. Marta gave him a worried glance and said quickly, "It's not what you think." Then she and Roger hurried away, losing themselves in the crowd. Tom Franklin had kept discreetly out of the way during the exchange. He came up behind Jean-Luc. "I meant what I said on the shuttle. I really am sorry about tinkering with the assignments," he said in a low voice. "I didn't realize you and Roger didn't get along." "Forget it," Jean-Luc growled. He stalked out, angry and hurt. Instead of going to dinner, he reported to the computer-assisted learning lab, whose computer the cadets had come to call Cal, after the initials of the lab. Jean-Luc slipped into a vacant booth and sat for a moment, his emotions steaming. So Marta was too busy for him, was she? Well, he could make himself just as busy as she was. Although he had finished all the work required of him for the day, nothing in the book said he couldn't get in some extra study. He could practice on his own with a holographic simulator. Then, he thought, just wait until we're in space. Let her great friend Roger slip up once, just once, and I'll show him up for the fool he is. For a few moments, Jean-Luc grinned fiercely as he imagined all sorts of ways that Roger could be humiliated. Then he realized that, pleasant as his fantasies were, they were only fantasies. He had to approach this task without anger as Mr. Spock would have done. Vulcans controlled their emotions, made them secondary to the task that had to be done. Jean-Luc breathed deeply, trying to calm down. And at last he had control of himself. He said, "Cal, I wish to review scanning and recording procedures for the Ishtar science probes. Class 9 simulation." "Class 9 simulation," Cal's voice repeated. "Do you wish to assign speed?" "No, make it challenging." The holographic representation of the Ishtar science station shimmered into existence. "Astronavigation," Cal said. "Give me a reading of position." Jean-Luc slipped his fingers across the control board, calling up computer memory. "We are in a planetary system," he said. "Current position is 1.5 AU from the star. The star is a type F9. We are in Alpha Quadrant, within 50 light years of the solar system. Hold on. 1 Class M planet." In his computer screen, the image of the planet glowed, unearthly, but holding an atmosphere that could support human life. "Scan for life forms." Although he had no viewport with which to see it directly, the figures in the simulated displays told Jean-Luc about the simulated planet. Slightly more massive than Earth, slightly drier, with oceans covering some 66% of its surface, land masses another 29%, the remainder made up of polar ice caps. The slowly revolving image in his computer screen showed blood-red continents smudged with vast areas of purple-green terrain. The oceans were a brilliant emerald green. "Nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere," Jean-Luc reported. "Life scan is in progress, but I'd guess that this world has a large plant biomass." "Why so, Mr. Picard?" "Because plants consume nitrogen and carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. This planet has less nitrogen than Earth and more oxygen, so it's reasonable to assume that it has more plant life. Those purple areas may be huge expanses of ground plants." Cal said, "You are right. Let us seek more information. Exact atmospheric composition?" Jean-Luc studied his instruments. "Nitrogen makes up 63%, oxygen 30%, carbon dioxide 2.4%, water vapor 1.72%, inert gases." He read out the list. A sensor chimed to let him know that a planetary scan had just been completed. "I'm getting direct life form readings now." "Report, please." "No electromagnetic band activity." "Meaning no intelligent life, Mr. Picard?" Jean-Luc frowned. Not necessarily. It could mean that any intelligent life form simply is not using electromagnetic communication. No radio, television, or holographic transmissions. That is a good point. Continue with your life forms assessment. Jean-Luc nodded. According to the readouts, there should be only a minimal number of animal life forms, but as I predicted, massive amounts of vegetation. It must be a jungle planet, or perhaps the seas support a great deal of algae, seaweed, and similar plant forms. Preliminary conclusions? A world in the early stages of evolution, Jean-Luc shot back. Since an F9 sun is a short-lived star, this planet probably has not had much time to undergo evolution. I suggest it might be comparable to the Devonian period of Earth's development. Chances of sentient life near zero? Wait. Report, Mr. Picard. Jean-Luc studied his readouts. Something was wrong, subtly odd about the charts and graphs. He noticed a spike in the EM bandwidths that covered the old-fashioned radio wave broadcast bands. Odd. Now I'm getting a very localized reading of electromagnetic transmission. That wasn't there before. Can you localize the transmission, Mr. Picard? Jean-Luc frantically scanned the whole planetary surface. Wait a bit. It isn't on the planet. It's coming from something in orbit. Cal had him pinpoint the orbital anomaly. Their imaginary ship closed on it. Report, Mr. Picard, said the relentless voice of Cal. It's a spaceship, Jean-Luc said. Type unknown. Mass, 107,000 standard tons. No life form readings. I can't find any plasma traces, no antimatter readings at all, no dilithium. It doesn't seem to have warp capability. It doesn't seem to be operational. The only energy reading I'm getting is that electromagnetic signal. Cal, request that communications put the broadcast on screen. In its remote voice, Cal said, Communications reports that the signal contains no visual images, audio only. Let's hear it. The eerie piping sounds of flute music filled Jean-Luc's ears, except that the flute played no melody and really wasn't a musical instrument. At times the sound went up the scale, becoming so shrill that it made Jean-Luc's teeth ache. Then it lost pitch and volume until it was a low thrumming vibration, felt rather than heard. Is that communication? Jean-Luc asked. Cal wouldn't give a centimeter. Is it communication, Mr. Picard? Jean-Luc checked to make sure the universal translator was operating correctly. According to the translator's diagnostic program, it was, which meant that this voice, if it was a voice, was not in the standard language pattern banks. If an alien was speaking, it was an alien the Federation had never conversed with before. Jean-Luc began to feel uncomfortable. Something about this situation bothered him. I'm modifying the universal translator patterns, Jean-Luc said. This sounds almost cetacean. I'm asking the communicator to extrapolate possible meanings based on whale song. The flute sound modulated, becoming more regular and breaking up into short bursts that almost sounded like words. A second EM spike showed up. We're being scanned, Jean-Luc said. Doesn't seem to be hostile, though. Just checking us out as we're checking it out. I recommend hailing the unknown ship, all frequencies offering assistance. The communications officer follows your suggestion. The officer reports no response, Cal said at once. No life forms, Jean-Luc said again, studying his instruments. His voice was low, thoughtful, and distinctly worried. How can that be if they're hailing us? Someone must be aboard that ship. Why? Why? Asked Cal. Because someone's hailing us, Jean-Luc said. But I can't determine what kind of life form it could possibly be. Since the voice is a little like the song of dolphins or whales, I've checked for oceanic forms as well as land forms. I can find no energy patterns. Wait, let me cross-check the translator signal against machine patterns. This might be an automatic message recording. Carry out your machine pattern analysis, Cal said. After another adjustment of the controls, Jean-Luc felt the hair prickling on the back of his neck. The fluting piping sound had become an emotionless, high-pitched voice. Have disregarded the warning. Automatic defense systems have been engaged. Repeat, surrender at once. Since you have disregarded... Cal, raise shields! Get us out of here! Jean-Luc roared. Is that your recommendation to the captain? Yes! After a second, Cal said, there is a 90% probability that your captain will demand further explanation before consenting to... Everything went dark. Jean-Luc pounded the edge of the desk in frustration. A moment later, the lights in the booth came back up. The alien craft swept the Ishtar with a powerful organic destruction ray, Cal said in its curiously cheerful mechanical voice. You and the other crew members have just been evaporated. What was it, Cal? A dead warship. It drifted into this system thousands of years ago. It was sealed in a stasis field, so no deterioration of its weaponry or systems occurred. Your scans disrupted that field, causing the ship to become active. Even without a crew, the ship acted as a weapon of war and struck out against a potential threat. Jean-Luc settled back, his face set in a grim mask of determination. Very well, I made some mistakes. I won't make them again. Let's run another simulation, and then a few more, just for good measure. He got better. By the end of the session, he was bone-weary, still angry, and ravenously hungry after missing his dinner. But he had only died once. It did not help to think that, out in the real dangers of space, once would have been enough.